Kate stared at her childhood home through the car window, memories washing over her as she pulled into the driveway. After 5 years in the city, returning to her small hometown felt both strange and comforting. The marketing firm had offered her a position she couldn't refuse, and now here she was, back where it all began. The first few days passed in a blur of unpacking and settling in. On Friday evening, her phone buzzed with a message from Tina, her best friend since elementary school. "You're finally back. Dinner at my place tomorrow?" "Dad's cooking his famous steaks." Kate smiled. She and Tina had stayed in touch over the years, but nothing compared to being in the same town again. She quickly typed back her acceptance. The next evening, Kate drove to Tina's house, a place she had visited countless times growing up. As she approached the door, memories of teenage sleepovers and study sessions flooded back. She knocked, hearing familiar footsteps rushing to answer. Tina flung open the door, her face lighting up. "Kate," she squealed, pulling her into a tight hug. "I can't believe you're really back." "It's good to see you," Kate laughed, following Tina inside. The house looked different. New furniture, fresh paint, but the warm feeling remained the same. The aroma of grilling meat filled the air, making Kate's stomach growl. "Dad's out back with the steaks," Tina said, leading her through the house. "He's been excited to see you too." Kate remembered Mr. Davis as a serious man with reading glasses and a newspaper always in hand. The divorce had happened after she'd left town, and she'd only heard about it through Tina's occasional updates. They stepped onto the back patio, and Kate froze. The man at the grill was not the Mr. Davis she remembered. Robert Davis had transformed. Gone was the slightly overweight, stern-faced father figure. In his place stood a fit, tanned man with salt and pepper hair and a warm smile. He wore a simple t-shirt that showed off arms toned from what must be regular workouts. "Kate, welcome back," he called, setting down his grilling tongs and walking over. His voice was just as she remembered, deep and comforting, but everything else about him had changed. "Mr. Davis," she replied, accepting his hug. She caught a whiff of his cologne, something woodsy and appealing. "Please call me Robert. I think you're old enough now," he said with a chuckle. His eyes, blue and intense, held hers for a moment too long. Kate felt a strange flutter in her stomach and quickly looked away. "Dad's gone fitness crazy since the divorce," Tina explained, rolling her eyes. "Midlife crisis, I keep telling him. It's called taking care of myself," Robert defended with a good-natured smile. "And it feels great." Dinner was delicious. The three of them fell into easy conversation, catching up on Kate's city life and the changes in town. Kate found herself watching Robert when he wasn't looking, the way his hands moved as he talked, the lines around his eyes when he laughed. She caught herself and focused on her plate, confused by her own thoughts. After dinner, Tina excused herself to take an important call from work. Kate offered to help Robert clear the table. "So, are you happy to be back?" Robert asked, loading the dishwasher while Kate racked leftovers. "I think so," she replied. "The city was exciting, but there's something about this place that feels like home." Robert nodded. "Some places get into your blood." He reached for the plate Kate was holding, their fingers brushing. A jolt of electricity shot up her arm and their eyes met. For a breathtaking moment, neither moved. The sound of Tina's voice broke the spell. Robert stepped back, clearing his throat. "Sorry about that," Tina said, returning to the kitchen. "Work emergency." The rest of the evening passed without incident, but Kate felt different. As she drove home later, her mind kept returning to that moment in the kitchen, the touch of Robert's fingers, the look in his eyes, and the realization that returning home might be more complicated than she had expected. 2 weeks passed with Kate settling into her new job. She found herself accepting Tina's invitations more often than not, always telling herself it was to catch up with her friend. But deep down, she knew part of her hoped to see Robert again. On a rainy Saturday afternoon, Kate arrived at Tina's house for a movie marathon. Her heart sank slightly when Tina explained that her father was out running errands. "He'll be back later though," Tina added, opening a bag of chips. "Said something about fixing that leaky faucet in the guest bathroom before it gets worse." The friends lost themselves in movies and conversation until Tina's phone rang. It was her boyfriend, needing help with his car that had broken down a few miles away. "I'm so sorry," Tina said, grabbing her keys. "I shouldn't be long." Dad should be back soon, so you won't be alone for long. Kate assured her it was fine and settled back on the couch to continue the movie. 20 minutes later, she heard the front door open. "Tina?" Robert called out. "She had to help Mark with his car," Kate replied, suddenly feeling nervous. "It broke down." Robert appeared in the doorway, his hair damp from the rain. He carried grocery bags in both hands. "Kate," he said, his voice softening, "I didn't know you were here." "Movie day," she explained, standing up. "Can I help with those?" In the kitchen, they worked together putting away groceries. The space felt smaller with just the two of them, the air charged with something Kate couldn't name. "How are you liking being back?" Robert asked, reaching past her to place a can in the cabinet, his arm briefly brushing hers. "It's good," she said, trying to ignore the warmth spreading through her. "Different, but good." They fell into easy conversation. Robert told her about his life since the divorce, how it had pushed him to reevaluate everything, how he'd found peace in his new routines. Kate shared stories about her city life and why she decided to return. "I should check that faucet before Tina gets back," Robert said eventually. "Want to keep me company? I could use a helper." In the small guest bathroom, Kate handed tools to Robert as he worked under the sink. The confined space kept them close, his occasional grunts of effort making her imagination wander to places it shouldn't go. "Can you hand me the wrench?" he asked, his arm extended from beneath the sink. As Kate placed it in his hand, her fingers lingered against his palm. Robert emerged from under the sink, his face inches from hers as he stood. Water dripped from the pipe above, landing on his shirt. "You're getting wet," Kate whispered, reaching out without thinking to touch the damp spot on his shoulder. Robert caught her hand, holding it against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat, strong and fast beneath her palm. "Kate," he said softly, his eyes searching hers, "I can't stop thinking about you." The confession hung between them, dangerous and thrilling. Kate knew she should pull away, make a joke, do anything to break this moment. Instead, she leaned forward slightly. "This is a bad idea," Robert whispered, even as his free hand moved to her waist. "I know," Kate replied, her voice barely audible. The sound of the front door opening broke them apart. They stepped away from each other quickly, Robert turning back to the sink as Tina's voice called out. "I'm back. Car's fixed." "We're in here," Kate called back, her voice shakier than she intended. "Your dad's fixing the faucet." That night, alone in her bed, Kate replayed the moment again and again, the feeling of Robert's hand holding hers, the look in his eyes, the words he'd spoken. She knew pursuing these feelings could hurt Tina deeply, yet she couldn't deny what was happening between them. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. "Is it wrong that I wish Tina hadn't come home when she did?" Robert. Kate stared at the message, her heart racing. Everything in her said this was dangerous territory, everything except her heart, which compelled her fingers to type a response. "No. I wish the same thing." Over the next week, Kate and Robert exchanged text messages daily. Each conversation danced around their feelings without crossing any clear lines. Kate knew she should stop, but every message notification made her heart race. Friday evening, her phone rang. It was Tina. "Hey, I've got bad news," Tina said. "I have to go to Atlanta for a last-minute work conference this weekend. I'm so sorry to cancel our plans." "Don't worry about it," Kate replied, trying not to think about what this meant for her potential run-ins with Robert. "Dad will be around though," Tina added casually. "He mentioned something about trying that new restaurant downtown tomorrow night. Maybe you two could go together so he's not eating alone. He enjoys your company." Kate's mouth went dry. "Oh, maybe. If I'm not busy." After hanging up, Kate stared at her phone. Was this a sign, or was she making a terrible mistake even considering it? Saturday evening arrived, and Kate found herself standing in front of her mirror, trying on her fourth outfit. She had texted Robert earlier, casually mentioning Tina's suggestion. His reply had been quick. "I'd love the company. Meet at the West Side Grill at 7. She finally decided on a simple black dress that hugged her curves without being too obvious. Her hands trembled slightly as she applied her lipstick. The restaurant was busy when she arrived. Robert waited outside, looking handsome in dark jeans and a blue button-down shirt that brought out his eyes. He smiled when he saw her, his gaze taking in her appearance with obvious appreciation. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Inside, they were seated in a quiet corner booth. The candlelight softened Robert's features, making him look younger. They ordered wine and fell into easy conversation that flowed from books to travel to dreams they'd put aside. It felt natural, as if they'd known each other this way for years, not as her friend's father but as a man who saw her, truly saw her. "This feels dangerous," Kate admitted after their second glass of wine, her fingers playing with the stem of her glass. Robert reached across the table, his fingers lightly touching hers. "I know. But being with you feels more right than anything has in a long time." Their meals came and went, neither paying much attention to the food. Under the table, their legs occasionally brushed, each touch sending electricity through Kate's body. "Should we get the check?" Robert finally asked, his voice lower than before. Kate nodded, knowing what her answer meant. Outside, the night air was cool against her flushed skin. They walked silently to the parking lot. "I could drive you home," Robert offered, standing close enough that she could smell his cologne. "Or we could go to your place," Kate suggested, her heart pounding. "Tina's not there." The drive to his house was quiet, the air between them charged with anticipation. Kate's mind raced with doubts and desires, but when Robert's hand found hers across the center console, she knew she couldn't turn back. Inside his house, Robert closed the door and turned to her. For a moment, they simply looked at each other in the dim light of the entryway. "Kate," he whispered, "if you want to change your mind, now's the time." She answered by stepping forward and placing her hand on his chest. "I don't want to change my mind." His kiss was gentle at first, then hungry as she responded with equal passion. His hands slid down her sides, pulling her against him as her arms wrapped around his neck. Years of forbidden thoughts and weeks of building tension culminated in this moment of surrender. They moved to his bedroom without breaking apart, shedding clothes along the way. When they finally fell onto his bed, skin against skin, Kate knew she was crossing a line she could never uncross. But as Robert's lips explored her body and his hands awakened sensations she'd never known possible, she couldn't bring herself to care about tomorrow. In the quiet darkness of his room, they gave in to their desires completely, their bodies moving together as if they'd always been meant to find each other this way. Kate woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains. For a moment, she felt disoriented until memories of the night before flooded back. Robert's body against hers, the things they'd whispered in the dark. She turned to find his side of the bed empty, but she could smell coffee brewing. She slipped on Robert's shirt and padded to the kitchen where he stood making breakfast, wearing only sweatpants. The morning light highlighted the muscles of his back. He turned and smiled when he heard her. "Morning," he said softly, his eyes taking in her appearance in his shirt. "Sleep well." Kate nodded, suddenly shy despite their intimacy hours before. Robert stepped forward and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, then kissed her gently. "I made coffee," he said, handing her a mug. They ate breakfast together, stealing glances and touches, both aware that reality waited outside these walls. When Kate finally dressed to leave, Robert pulled her close. "I don't regret last night," he said firmly, "but I know this is complicated." "Tina comes home tomorrow," Kate replied, resting her head against his chest. "What are we doing, Robert?" He sighed. "I don't know, but I want to see you again." She looked up at him. "Me too." They agreed to be careful, to give themselves time to figure things out before involving Tina. Kate left with a final kiss and his promise to call her. 3 weeks passed. They met secretly whenever possible, brief moments stolen in the quiet corners of their small town. Each time, Kate told herself it would be the last, that she would end things before someone got hurt. Each time, she found herself back in Robert's arms. One morning, Kate woke feeling nauseated. She barely made it to the bathroom before getting sick. She blamed bad takeout from the night before, but when the same thing happened the next day and the day after that, a different possibility began to take shape in her mind. Kate stared at the pregnancy test on her bathroom counter, her hands shaking. They had used protection, but she knew nothing was completely certain. 2 minutes felt like 2 hours as she waited for the result. When the second line appeared, clear and undeniable, Kate sank to the floor. Pregnant. She was pregnant with her best friend's father's baby. For days, Kate avoided both Tina and Robert, claiming to be sick with a stomach bug. She needed time to think, to process what this meant for all of them. her phone filled with concerned messages from both of them. After a week of hiding, she knew she had to face Robert. She texted him to meet her at the small park on the edge of town, where they were unlikely to run into anyone they knew. Robert was already waiting when she arrived, pacing beside the empty playground. His face showed relief when he saw her, quickly followed by concern. "Kate, what's going on? You look pale. Are you still sick?" She sat on a bench, motioning for him to join her. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "I have to tell you something," she began, her voice barely audible, "and I don't know what we're going to do." Robert took her hand, his eyes searching her face. "Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together." Kate took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant." His hand tightened around hers, his expression frozen between shock and disbelief. Are you sure?" She nodded, tears filling her eyes. 3 tests, all positive." Robert ran his free hand through his hair, his breath coming faster. "But we were careful." "Not careful enough," Kate whispered. For a long moment, neither spoke. The weight of their situation settled around them like a heavy blanket. Tina, their age difference, the small town they lived in, everything suddenly seemed insurmountable. Finally, Robert looked at her. "What do you want to do?" Kate shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I don't know. I just don't know." Robert pulled her into his arms, holding her as she cried. Over her shoulder, his face revealed his own turmoil, fear, confusion, but something else too. Something that looked almost like hope. 3 days passed after Kate's revelation in the park. 3 days of Robert's messages asking to talk more, to make a plan. 3 days of Kate avoiding Tina's calls. She felt trapped in a prison of her own making, with no clear way out. On the 4th day, Kate finally agreed to meet Robert at his house when he assured her Tina would be at work. When she arrived, Robert opened the door immediately, as if he'd been watching for her. His eyes were rimmed with shadows, evidence of sleepless nights that matched her own. "Come in," he said softly, leading her to the living room where 2 cups of tea waited. He'd remembered she couldn't drink coffee now. They sat across from each other, the silence heavy between them. Kate racked her hands around the warm mug, drawing comfort from its heat. "I've been thinking about this nonstop," Robert finally said. "About us, about the baby, about Tina." Kate nodded. "Me too. I don't see how this ends without someone getting hurt." Robert leaned forward. "Kate, I need to tell you something, and I want you to really hear me. What happened between us wasn't just some fling for me. These past few weeks, getting to know you as a woman, not just my daughter's friend, I've fallen for you." Kate's heart skipped. Despite everything, hearing those words made something warm bloom in her chest. "Robert." "I know," he said quickly. "It's terrible timing. It's complicated. It's probably the worst possible scenario. But my feelings are real." Kate felt tears welling up. "Mine too," she admitted. "But what about Tina? She's going to be devastated. She'll feel betrayed by both of us." Robert ran a hand through his hair. "Yes, she will. And that kills me. But hiding it will only make things worse." "So what do we do?" Kate asked, her hand unconsciously moving to her still flat stomach. Robert moved to sit beside her on the couch, taking her hands in his. "First, I need to know what you want about the baby. Whatever you decide, I'll support you." Kate was quiet for a moment. She'd been asking herself this question for days. "I want to keep it," she finally said. "Despite how it happened, I already feel connected to this baby." Relief washed over Robert's face. "I was hoping you'd say that." He squeezed her hands. "Kate, I want to be with you, properly, not sneaking around. I want to build a life with you and our child. But Tina will be hurt," he finished, "and angry. And she has every right to be. But eventually, hopefully, she'll understand that what we feel for each other is real." Kate leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "When do we tell her?" "Soon," Robert said. "Together. But first, I think we need time to figure out exactly what we're going to say." They spent the afternoon talking through scenarios, planning their future in careful, tentative terms. By evening, Kate felt lighter than she had in days. They still faced an uphill battle, but at least they would face it together. As Kate prepared to leave, Robert pulled her into his arms. His hand gently rested on her stomach, the tender gesture bringing fresh tears to her eyes. Our baby, he whispered, wonder in his voice. He kissed her forehead, then her lips, a kiss full of promise and commitment. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Kate drove home with the windows down, letting the evening air cool her flushed cheeks. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tana. Movie night tomorrow? I miss my best friend. Reality crashed back. Tomorrow. They would have to tell her tomorrow. There was no more time to prepare, no more ways to delay the inevitable. Kate texted back her agreement with shaking fingers. That night, Kate lay awake, one hand on her stomach, imagining the tiny life growing within her. A life created from a forbidden love. She thought of Robert, of his touch when he said, our baby, and despite all her fears, she smiled. Whatever storm was coming, this new life was worth it. Kate stood on Tina's doorstep, her stomach in knots. Robert had agreed to meet her there, so they could tell Tina together. Her finger hovered over the doorbell, trembling slightly. Before she could press it, the door swung open. Kate, Tina exclaimed, pulling her into a hug. I was watching for you through the window. I've missed you so much. Dad's running late, said he had to finish something at work, but he'll join us later. Kate followed Tina inside, guilt washing over her with each step. Tina chatted happily about movies and snacks, oblivious to Kate's inner turmoil. They settled on the couch, and Kate tried to focus on the film Tina had chosen, but her mind raced with the words she would soon have to say. An hour later, they heard the front door open. Robert stepped into the living room, his eyes meeting Kate's briefly before turning to his daughter. Hey, sweetie, he said, his voice strained. Sorry I'm late. Tina paused the movie. No worries, Dad. We're just getting to the good part. Want to join us? Robert remained standing. Actually, Tina, Kate and I need to talk to you about something. Tina looked between them, confusion clouding her features. What's going on? Kate moved to sit beside Robert, who had taken a seat in the armchair across from Tina. The physical closeness was subtle, but Tina didn't miss it. Her eyes narrowed. Tina, Kate began, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to say this, but you deserve the truth. She took a deep breath. Your dad and I, we've been seeing each other. Tina's face went blank. Seeing each other? What does that mean exactly? Robert leaned forward. It means we've developed feelings for each other, Tina. Real feelings. Tina stood abruptly. What? Is this some kind of joke? Her voice rose with each word. My dad, my best friend, and my dad. It wasn't planned, Kate said, tears filling her eyes. It just happened. Things like this don't just happen, Tina snapped. How long has this been going on? Kate and Robert exchanged glances. A few weeks, Robert admitted. Tina paced the room, her hands clenched into fists. A few weeks? Behind my back? In my own house? She turned to Kate. I trusted you. I invited you into our lives again, and this is how you repay me? Tina, please, Robert started. Don't, Tina cut him off. You're 20 years older than her dad. What are you thinking? Her eyes widened suddenly. Wait, is this why you've been sick, Kate? Are you pregnant? The color drained from Kate's face. She hadn't planned to reveal that part tonight, but Tina had always been perceptive. Slowly, Kate nodded. Tina stumbled back as if physically struck. Oh my God, she whispered. I'm going to be sick. We wanted to tell you properly, Robert said, his voice steady despite the tension. We care about you, Tina. We never wanted to hurt you. Care about me? Tina laughed bitterly. If you cared about me, neither of you would have done this. She pointed at the door. Get out. Both of you. I can't even look at you right now. Kate stood, tears streaming down her face. Tina, please. You're my best friend. No. Tina shook her head. Best friends don't sleep with each other's parents. Best friends don't lie for weeks. We're done, Kate. Robert reached for his daughter. Tina. You too, Dad, she said, stepping back from his touch. I need space. A lot of it. Kate moved toward the door, her body feeling heavy with sorrow. Robert followed, his shoulders slumped in defeat. At the doorway, Kate turned back one last time. I'm so sorry, Tina. I never meant for any of this to happen. But it did happen, Tina replied coldly. And now we all have to live with it. The door closed behind them with a final sounding click. In the driveway, Kate broke down, sobbing against Robert's chest. He held her close, his own eyes wet with tears. "What have we done?" Kate whispered. Robert had no answer, only the warmth of his arms around her as the night grew cold around them. 3 months passed with no word from Tina. Kate's pregnancy began to show, a small bump that Robert would touch with wonder when they were alone. They had moved in together, into a small house on the other side of town, away from gossiping neighbors and painful memories. The morning sickness had finally subsided, leaving Kate with a new energy she channeled into making their house a home. She painted the spare room a soft yellow, ready to become a nursery. Robert built shelves and assembled furniture, his hands creating a space for their child with the same care he showed Kate. On a crisp autumn morning, Kate sat on their porch swing, a cup of tea cradled in her hands, when a familiar car pulled into the driveway. Her heart jumped to her throat. "Tina." Kate set down her cup, her hands suddenly trembling. She watched as Tina sat in her car for a long moment before finally stepping out. "Robert," Kate called through the open door. "Robert, come quick." He appeared at her side just as Tina approached the porch steps. The three of them stared at each other, the silence heavy with unspoken words. "Hi," Tina finally said, her voice smaller than Kate remembered. "Hi, honey," Robert replied, his hand finding Kate's for support. Tina's eyes dropped to Kate's visible belly, then back up to their joined hands. "Can we talk?" Inside, they sat in the living room. Kate and Robert on the couch, Tina in the armchair across from them. The scene felt like a mirror image of their last encounter, roles reversed. "I'm still angry," Tina began, her hands twisting in her lap. "I still feel betrayed, but my therapist says I need to at least try to understand." Kate felt tears prick her eyes at the mention of therapy. Another consequence of their actions she hadn't fully considered. "We never meant to hurt you," Robert said gently. "I know that doesn't change anything, but it's the truth." Tina nodded stiffly. "I know. It took me a while to believe that." She looked directly at Kate. "I miss my friend, and I miss my dad, and I hate that I miss you both when I'm still so mad." Kate reached out a hand, stopping short of touching Tina. "We miss you too. So much." "I'm going to be a big sister," Tina said suddenly, looking at Kate's stomach. "That's weird." Despite everything, Kate laughed, a small, surprised sound. "Yeah, it is weird." A ghost of a smile touched Tina's lips. "Is it a boy or girl?" "We don't know yet," Robert answered. "The appointment is next week." Tina was quiet for a moment. "I'd like to know. When you find out." Kate nodded, hope blooming in her chest. "We'll tell you first." They talked for an hour, careful conversations that skirted around the edges of their hurt, but began to build bridges across the divide. When Tina finally stood to leave, the air felt lighter, as if a storm had passed. At the door, Tina hesitated. "I'm not ready to forgive you yet, either of you. But I want to try. Maybe we can have dinner next week." "We'd love that," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. After Tina left, Kate and Robert held each other in the doorway, watching her car disappear down the street. "Do you think we'll ever be okay again?" Kate whispered against his chest. Robert kissed the top of her head. "I think we just took the first step." That night, as they lay in bed together, Robert's hand resting protectively on Kate's growing belly, Kate felt the baby move for the first time, a flutter like butterfly wings. "Robert," she gasped, guiding his hand to the spot. "Did you feel that?" His face lit up with wonder as he felt the tiny movement beneath his palm. "Our baby," he whispered. In that moment, Kate knew that no matter how difficult the road ahead might be, they would travel it together. This unconventional family they were building, Robert, Kate, their child, and someday, hopefully, Tina too, was worth fighting for. As Kate drifted to sleep in Robert's arms, she thought of how sometimes life's biggest mistakes could lead to its greatest blessings. Their love story wasn't perfect. It had begun in secrecy and caused pain to someone they both loved. But it was real, and it was theirs, and that was enough.